The night air was thick with tension, and Callan's heart pounded in his chest as he stood at the edge of the wrecked city, staring out at the ruins of Earth. His world was crumbling, and yet, the moment he glanced at her, Zelissa, the alien girl with luminous blue skin, everything seemed to freeze. Her presence, serene yet filled with an underlying curiosity, calmed him in a way that nothing else could. She wasn't human. But in that instant, it didn't matter. "What are you thinking about?" Her voice cut through the silence, soft but sharp like the wind that howled around them. Callan didn't answer right away. The question, though simple, was loaded. Was he thinking about their mission? The impending invasion? Or was he simply contemplating the way her silver-white hair fluttered in the breeze, the way her large eyes, reflecting a blend of starlight and confusion, focused intently on him? "I'm thinking about the world we're trying to save," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. He could feel the weight of his words, the weight of everything that had brought them here. Zelissa turned to face him fully, her gaze unwavering. She was still so new to everything human, everything Earth. She could see that he was struggling with something deeper, though she couldn't quite grasp it. Emotions were a complicated language for her, one she was still trying to translate. "Do you believe we can win this war?" she asked, her voice gentle yet probing. "I have to," he replied, meeting her gaze with unflinching certainty. But there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, one that he hoped she hadn't caught. For a moment, silence reigned between them, thick and suffocating. The ruins of humanity stretched out in all directions. Broken structures, charred remnants of once bustling streets, the sharp smell of burning metal and concrete in the air. Yet in this chaos, Zelissa's presence was a strange kind of solace, a reminder that there was still something worth fighting for. "You still don't understand," he added, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "The stakes, the sacrifices. Human life, it's fragile. We're always one mistake away from losing everything." Zelissa's brow furrowed, her alien instincts still trying to make sense of his words. "I understand loss. My people—" "No," Callan interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "You don't. You've never had to fight for survival like this. Your people come from a place of power, a place where you don't question your strength. But here, we fight with everything we have because we need to." Zelissa blinked at the sudden intensity in his tone. She'd never seen him like this before. Callan had always been the composed, calm soldier, the one who carried the weight of the world and never showed the strain. She wanted to understand him more, but there were barriers she couldn't cross. There was too much humanity in him that she couldn't quite comprehend. Too many scars. Too many fears. "Why does it matter?" she asked quietly, almost innocently. "Why do you care so much about this planet? It is dying. You are all dying." Her words, though spoken with no ill intent, cut through him like a blade. He felt the sting of truth, but it was more than that. It was the realization that she didn't truly get what was at stake. She didn't understand the fierce, stubborn attachment humans had to the planet, to their very existence. "I care because this is where I'm from," Callan said through gritted teeth. "This is home. The people I love are here. And right now, they're all being slaughtered by a force they can't even comprehend." Zelissa's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her ethereal presence both alien and oddly comforting. She wasn't used to human emotions, but she could see the rawness of his pain in his eyes, feel it in the air between them. "I don't know how to feel about that," she admitted. "I see the destruction, but I don't understand the need to protect it all." The words hung in the air for a long moment before Callan let out a breath, the tension easing from his body just a fraction. He looked at her, his expression softening, though the hard edge of reality never quite left his gaze. "Let me show you," he murmured, stepping closer. Zelissa took a step back, her alien instincts kicking in, and she felt the strange mix of fear and fascination bubble inside her. Her people never showed affection like humans did. Touch wasn't a part of their culture, at least not in the same way. But there was something magnetic about Callan's intensity, something she couldn't resist, no matter how foreign it felt. He made her want to understand, to feel. "Why me?" Zalissa finally asked, her voice betraying the vulnerability she so often hid beneath her composed exterior. "Why choose to bring me into this? Why not someone else? Someone more like you?" Callan sighed, his shoulders heavy with a burden that was too big for words. "I didn't choose. It just happened. But you're not just someone else. There's something about you, Zalissa. Something I can't ignore." Her breath caught at the simplicity and truth of his words. For a moment, the chaos around them ceased to exist, and all she could see was him, the human who had fought for everything, who had stood by her side despite their differences. "Maybe you don't understand me," Callan continued, his voice low, "but in a way, that's what makes it easier to fight with you. You're different. I don't have to carry the weight of your expectations. Just you." Zalissa didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say something profound, but the truth was, she was still learning, still grasping the magnitude of the emotions she was feeling. But at that moment, standing next to him, feeling the intensity of his words, she realized something deep inside her had shifted. A small, undeniable flicker of warmth. For the first time in a long while, Zalissa allowed herself to believe in the possibility of hope. The ruins of Earth lay before them, but as Callan and Zalissa locked eyes, a quiet resolve passed between them. They had a long road ahead, one filled with danger, uncertainty, and endless questions. But for now, they would face it together. And in that moment, the faintest hint of something stronger than just survival began to stir between them. The storm was coming. Callan could feel it in the pit of his stomach long before the first rumble of thunder echoed across the barren landscape. The atmosphere had grown heavy, oppressive, and the winds were starting to pick up, carrying with them the faint scent of ozone and ash. As much as he tried to focus on the task ahead, his mind kept drifting back to the quiet moment with Zalissa, her vulnerability, her confusion about Earth and its people, about him. He could still hear her soft voice in his head, asking why he fought so hard to protect a dying world. Callan glanced over at her now, standing beside him, her alien features illuminated by the faint glow of a dying sun. She didn't speak much about her own people, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, a hesitation, that told him she was struggling with something deeper. Maybe it was the same thing he struggled with every day, the uncertainty of whether any of this was worth it. "Are you ready?" he asked, breaking the silence between them. Zalissa turned to face him, her eyes narrowing, as if measuring him. Her expression was unreadable. For all her alien beauty, she was as human as any other person when it came to the storm of emotions that churned inside her. But she had yet to fully understand her own feelings. He could see it in the way she carried herself, a mixture of confusion and awe, and perhaps a little fear. "Ready for what?" she replied, her voice almost too calm. "The mission," Callan said, voice firm, though the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. "We need to infiltrate their camp, find out where the invasion's coming from, and stop it before it's too late." Zalissa's gaze turned distant, as if she were looking beyond him, beyond the ravaged world around them. The invaders, the ones who had destroyed so much of Earth, were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They weren't just powerful, they were ancient, with technology that far surpassed anything Earth's military could muster. Callan didn't know how to fight that, but it was his duty to try. "And what if we can't stop them?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence once again. "What happens to us then?" Callan swallowed, feeling a weight in his chest. He didn't know the answer. If they failed, Earth would fall. There would be nothing left to save. but admitting that out loud would only make things worse. Zalissa didn't need to hear it. She needed to see him believe. Needed to see hope. "We'll stop them," he said, as much for himself as for her. "Together." She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for some hint of truth in his words. Zalissa had no reason to trust him. Her people, her race, were mysterious. She didn't know the meaning of loyalty the way humans did. She didn't understand sacrifice the way Earthlings did, at least not yet. Before she could respond, an explosion tore through the distance, followed by a second, and then a third. The ground shook beneath them, and Callan instinctively grabbed her arm, pulling her behind the ruined walls of a once thriving structure. Her skin, though cool to the touch, shivered under his grasp. Zalissa didn't flinch, but she didn't seem entirely at ease either. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Ambush," Callan muttered. His pulse quickened, adrenaline coursing through him. There was no time to waste now. The enemy had found them. Zalissa's eyes flashed with something, fear, maybe, or something darker. "What do we do now?" "We fight." The words came out sharper than he intended. The heat of the moment always brought out the soldier in him. But the moment she looked at him, the way she stood there, almost uncertain, his resolve faltered. He wasn't fighting just for Earth anymore. No, there was something else. Something he couldn't name. Before he could think further, a group of armored invaders emerged from the shadows, their technology shimmering as it moved. They moved with a strange, deliberate grace, their eyes scanning the area, seemingly aware of their every move. "Stay behind me," Callan ordered. His gun was already drawn, but it felt like a small weapon against a much larger threat. He turned to Zalissa, his eyes hard. "When I say go, use your abilities to disable their systems. Can you do that?" Zalissa hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the invaders, then back to Callan. "I can try," she said, voice tense, almost uncertain. It wasn't like her to sound unsure, but there was something about the invaders that unnerved her, something that cut through her usual calm. "Don't think," Callan said. "Just act. I'll cover you." Zalissa nodded once, a brief motion, and then they both moved into action. Callan took the lead, firing his weapon in quick bursts, the sound of gunfire echoing through the ruined streets. The invaders retaliated, their energy shields absorbing most of the blasts, but Callan kept advancing, knowing that each moment counted. Zalissa, meanwhile, focused her energy, her mind racing as she tried to channel the strange, unearthly power that had always been a part of her, something her people could do with ease, but she had never been trained to control. As the invaders approached, their shields glowing with a threatening intensity, Zalissa extended her hand, focusing all her will into the energy field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden pulse, the invaders' shields flickered and shorted, their weapons sparking as if they had been struck by a power surge. "Now!" Callan shouted. Zalissa didn't hesitate. She moved quickly, her body weaving through the chaos as she disabled more of their weapons, sending them into disarray. The invaders tried to regroup, but their focus was split, their confidence faltering. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in that brief moment, there was something unspoken, that passed between Callan and Zalissa. They weren't just fighting side by side. They were beginning to understand each other, to see in the other what they had yet to admit to themselves. As the invaders regrouped for another assault, Zalissa's voice broke through the noise. "We don't have much time," she said, her tone steady despite the battle raging around them. "They're sending reinforcements. We need to get out of here." Callan nodded, but something in her voice stopped him. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that they were playing a dangerous game, a game where the stakes were higher than either of them had anticipated. And as much as they had just begun to trust each other, the truth lingered. Not everything could be controlled. Not even their growing connection. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant background to the chaos outside. Callan stood at the bridge, hands clenched against the control panel, staring at the shattered skyline of what was once the heart of humanity's capital. The invaders had already turned this city into a ghost of its former self, their technologies overwhelming anything Earth had ever developed. In the distance, dark clouds billowed across the sky, reflecting the blood-red hue of a setting sun. "Are you sure about this?" Zalissa's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but filled with an unspoken weight. Callan glanced at her, standing just a few feet away. She was watching him intently, her alien eyes taking in the scene with a level of detachment that stung him more than he cared to admit. He knew she wasn't human, but in moments like this, he wished she could understand. Not just the stakes, but the terror, the kind of fear only a human heart could truly grasp. He turned away, avoiding her gaze. "We don't have a choice," he replied, his tone flat, betraying none of the worry gnawing at him. "We need to infiltrate their command center. If we can shut down their systems, we'll have a shot at stopping this invasion." Zalissa tilted her head, as if considering his words with a precision he couldn't match. The tension between them had grown in the last few days. She wasn't like the others, human or otherwise. There was a sharpness to her, a curiosity that made him both uneasy and intrigued. But it wasn't just that. The distance she maintained, the emotional barrier she'd built, felt like a constant reminder of the rift between them. She didn't get Earth. She didn't get him. "Stop acting like this is just another mission," Zalissa said, her voice cool but tinged with a note of frustration. "You're not fooling anyone, Callan. You don't believe we'll succeed, and neither do I." Her words hit harder than he expected. He wanted to turn and shout at her, tell her that she had no idea what it was like to fight for a world that was crumbling, to protect a future that might never come. But instead, all he did was clench his jaw and keep his focus on the swirling chaos outside. "You don't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Zalissa didn't reply right away, but the quiet that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Her gaze softened just slightly, her alien features, once so unreadable to him, taking on an expression of something like pity. She knew what it was like to lose a home, to watch everything fall apart. But she hadn't experienced the full weight of it. She hadn't watched loved ones die in a war that seemed endless, unwinnable. "I understand more than you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Callan didn't respond. He couldn't. His emotions, raw and tangled, swirled around inside him, pushing him to speak, to explain, to make her understand. But he knew it wouldn't help. Not yet. Instead, he turned and began to walk toward the exit. "We're almost at the target zone. Prepare yourself." Zalissa's eyes followed him, her face still unreadable, but something in her gaze shifted. It was almost as if she were seeing him differently. Something had changed between them since the battle days ago, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As they prepared to land near the invaders' command center, Callan tried to block out the sound of his racing heartbeat. He had always been able to compartmentalize, to focus on the task at hand, but this time, it was different. The mission was no longer just about saving Earth. It had become personal. The shuttle rocked violently as they neared their landing point. The vibrations were sharp, jarring. He braced himself against the side of the craft, eyes narrowing as they approached their target. "There!" Zalissa said, her voice calm once again, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. "I see the central structure." Callan's gaze followed her finger, settling on the massive, twisted spire that loomed over the rest of the invaders' base. It was a monument to their superiority, a reminder of just how outmatched humanity had become. But the central spire was also their weakness. It was the heart of their operations, and if they could destroy it, they could cripple the invasion. The shuttle touched down, the landing gear scraping against the uneven terrain. The hatch hissed open, and Callan immediately stepped out, his weapon raised. Zalissa followed, moving with an eerie grace, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. As they moved through the darkened streets, Callan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the looming threat of the invaders, it was the way Zalissa seemed to pull away from him, keeping her distance. The tension between them had shifted in the last few days. It wasn't just the mission anymore. There was something unspoken that hung between them, something that neither of them knew how to address. Every glance, every word seemed to carry more weight than before, and it was starting to feel like a pressure he couldn't escape. "Stay close," Callan ordered, his voice tight. "We don't know how many there are inside." Zalissa nodded, but her expression remained distant. She was in control of her emotions, as always, but Callan could sense the underlying unease in her movements. They were on the edge of something, and he knew it. They moved deeper into the heart of the invaders' base, weaving between collapsed buildings and smoldering debris. The air was thick with dust, and the acrid scent of burning metal, and every step they took felt like they were trespassing in a world not meant for them. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Callan motioned for Zalissa to take cover, and they ducked into a nearby alcove, both of them holding their breath as the invaders passed by. Zalissa's hand brushed against his as they crouched there in the dark. It was brief, almost accidental, but the contact sent a shockwave through him. He tried to ignore it, but his pulse quickened and his chest tightened. "Callan!" Zalissa's voice was quiet, but there was something in it now, something that made his name sound more like a question. He turned his head to look at her, but the moment was broken as a surge of energy crackled from above, and the ground beneath them trembled. The invaders were onto them. "It's now or never," Callan muttered, tightening his grip on his weapon. Zalissa met his gaze, her expression hardening into resolve. "Then let's finish this." They moved forward together, the air thick with anticipation and the looming threat of the unknown. There was no going back now. The line had been crossed. The storm raged around them, the deafening roar of the wind mixing with the violent crash of waves against the rocky shore. The energy field, a shimmering barrier of unnatural light, pulsed with an ominous rhythm, enclosing Ethan and Lyra like prey trapped in a cage of force. Behind them, the group of aliens, their eyes filled with intent and something darker, approached slowly, their leader a looming figure whose voice echoed through the cacophony. "You can't escape, Lyra." The leader's voice was a low growl, cutting through the chaos. "You are ours now." Lyra's chest rose and fell in rapid breaths, her hand instinctively tightening around Ethan's wrist. The warmth of her touch did little to calm the surge of adrenaline racing through his veins, but it was a tether, a reminder of what they were fighting for. "We're not going back," Lyra said, her voice strong despite the terror hanging in the air. "I won't let them take me." Ethan's eyes flicked from the energy field to the aliens closing in. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, but the energy barrier was a wall they couldn't pass. He swallowed hard, his mind racing for a way out. His hand gripped the hilt of his knife, the cold metal a reminder that he couldn't depend on weapons alone. They were cornered. There had to be another way. "We don't have much time," he muttered, his mind already calculating their options. "We need to outsmart them." Lyra's eyes met his, and in that moment, everything about her, her strength, her determination, seemed to converge into something that made him believe they could still survive. "There's always a way," she said, her lips curving into a faint, defiant smile. "We just have to be faster." The leader stepped forward, his presence so overwhelming that it was almost as if the jungle itself recoiled. "You think you can outrun me, Lyra? After all this time?" His gaze shifted to Ethan, and for a split second, Ethan felt the weight of his gaze like a physical blow. "And you, human, you will regret this. She is my responsibility, not yours." Ethan's pulse quickened. There was no fear now, just anger. The way this alien spoke, like Lyra was nothing more than a possession, he couldn't stand it. His hand tightened around the knife again, but he knew better than to think he could take them all down. There were too many of them, and the odds were shifting in their favor. But Lyra wasn't finished. Her stance, her expression, it was as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She stepped forward, her silver eyes flashing with intensity. "You'll regret underestimating me," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I won't let you take me without a fight." With a sudden, swift movement, she thrust her palm forward. The air between them seemed to crackle as a burst of raw energy surged from her, slamming into the leader. He staggered back, his feet sliding in the mud as a bright flare of light exploded from the impact. For a brief, fleeting moment, the storm quieted, the wind cutting off abruptly as the energy surged. But the leader recovered quickly, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think that will stop me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Lyra's voice rang with conviction, and then she turned to Ethan, her eyes flashing with determination. "We don't have time to wait for them to make the first move. Are you with me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. There was something in her gaze, something that said they could win if they fought together. They had no other choice. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. Without another word, Lyra gestured, and the energy barrier flared. The aliens halted, momentarily stunned by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Ethan watched in awe as Lyra focused her energy, her body trembling with the strain, but her eyes never wavered. She was the storm now, untamed, powerful, unstoppable. Ethan knew this was their chance. As Lyra's power surged, the ground beneath him shook. He felt a hum deep in his bones, the force of her ability coursing through the air like electricity. With one final, decisive motion, Lyra shattered the energy field, sending a wave of power cascading outward. The barrier cracked and dissipated in a cascade of sparks, leaving them free to move. The leader's eyes widened in disbelief. "You?" Before he could finish his sentence, Ethan lunged forward, his movements sharp and instinctual. His knife slashed through the air, catching one of the alien's arms in a brutal arc. The creature let out a sharp hiss, its dark blood splattering against the wet ground. Ethan didn't wait for the creature to retaliate. He was already moving, already anticipating the next strike. Lyra's power surged again, this time more focused. Her arms extended outward, and the air around her seemed to warp, rippling with an unseen force. The second alien lunged at her, but she effortlessly sidestepped, her energy wrapping around it like a chain, pulling the creature off its feet and sending it crashing to the ground. In the chaos, Ethan couldn't help but glance back at Lyra. Her movements were fluid, precise, a testament to the power she had so long kept hidden. It wasn't just her rebellion that had shaped her. It was her ability to control and harness forces beyond anything he had ever known. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, and she was fighting for more than just herself now. They were winning. The leader roared in frustration as the last of his companions fell. Ethan felt the tide of the battle shift in their favor. Lyra's power was too much for them to contain, her energy a force of nature that they had never anticipated. But the leader wasn't done. His eyes burned with hatred as he summoned his own power, the air around him thickening with an almost tangible malevolence. His voice came in a guttural growl. "You think this is over? You're wrong. I will not be defeated by a mere rebel and a human." Ethan's stomach dropped as he saw the leader prepare for his final strike. But before he could react, Lyra was already there, her energy forming an impenetrable shield around them both. I will never let you take me again, Lyra said, her voice as fierce as the storm. This ends now. With a final burst of power, she unleashed her energy in a wave that shook the ground. The leader's form flickered as the power hit him head-on, his body twisting in midair before collapsing to the ground in a heap. Silence fell. Lyra's chest heaved with exertion, her face pale from the strain, but she stood tall. Ethan could see the fire in her eyes, the fierce resolve that had carried her this far. And in that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. He hadn't just saved her. They had saved each other. Ethan stepped toward her, his hand reaching out. She didn't flinch, but rather met him with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes. We did it, he said, his voice rough with relief. Lyra nodded, her lips curving into a small, exhausted smile. Yes, we did. The battle was over. But the war was only just beginning.